The armies of ancient Rome built an empire that spanned continents, binding countless lands under their crimson banners. We often hear of their conquests, the disciplined legions, the grand triumphs in the Forum, and the sweeping changes they wrought upon the ancient world. Yet behind these iconic victories lay a less glamorous, far grimmer reality. Every Roman triumph left a battlefield strewn with casualties: fallen Roman legionaries, barbarian warriors, cavalry mounts, and debris of war. How did the Romans handle this inevitable aftermath? What processes did they follow to clear their dead, tend to the wounded, and, in general, clean up once the din of combat faded? In this exploration, we will delve into the seldom discussed details of Roman battlefield cleanup, shedding light on the moral, practical, and religious imperatives that guided the legions in their darkest tasks. From the earliest days of the Republic to the twilight of the Empire, the Romans developed and refined a military system that placed enormous emphasis on discipline and logistics. The aftermath of a battle was not merely a matter of leaving bodies to rot or letting local peasants pick through the remains. It was an integral part of maintaining the army's morale, claiming or redistributing valuable resources, and upholding religious and cultural customs regarding the dead. Though accounts of the post-battle process differ based on historical period, region, and the scale of victory or defeat, certain unifying themes emerge. The Roman priority to identify their fallen comrades, to salvage equipment, to dispose of bodies, both friend and foe, and to ensure that the battlefield itself did not become a breeding ground for disease or a moral liability for the troops. Romans inherited a strong sense of duty and piety from their ancestors. These attitudes were reflected in burial rituals and the treatment of the dead. From archaic times, the Romans believed that proper funeral rites were necessary for the soul to find peace. Failing to provide these rites risked haunting by restless spirits or the disapproval of the gods. Consequently, even in hostile territories, Roman generals understood the importance of preventing their dead from remaining exposed. In earlier periods, these beliefs fueled heroic measures to retrieve bodies after combat. Stories abound of legionaries braving skirmishes to drag the corpses of their tribunes or standard-bearers back to the safety of Roman lines. An act that combined loyalty, religious duty, and pride. Likewise, while the Romans had less concern for the spiritual fates of enemy bodies, certain customs, especially when dealing with other Italian peoples, dictated some minimal respect for those who had fallen. Pragmatically, many generals also knew that ill treatment of enemy dead could ignite hatred or spur revenge, particularly if the vanquished population was destined to become part of Rome's extended realms. So even for foes, there were considerations regarding how to handle corpses, bury or burn them, or at least gather them away from strategic points and roads. When a Roman legion emerged victorious from a major clash, priorities quickly shifted. First and foremost, the army had to secure the site to prevent a counterattack or an ambush. Patrols scoured the surrounding area, while cavalry or auxiliary cohorts often pursued retreating enemy soldiers or scouted for hidden threats. Only once the commander was certain that no immediate danger threatened could the legion turn to the heavy labor of cleaning up. This emphasis on security over immediate cleanup was crucial. Otherwise, an unsuspecting Roman force, scattered across a gore-laden plain, might be taken unawares. During these hours, the wounded were the second priority. Roman Medici, medical personnel, and legionary aides scoured the battlefield in search of survivors. Roman legionaries first, allies second, and then any captives or important prisoners among the enemy. The Romans were quite advanced in battlefield medicine for their time, at least in relative terms. They used triage methods. Soldiers with treatable wounds were quickly evacuated behind the lines or to a makeshift medical station. More serious cases were stabilized on site if possible. Meanwhile, legionaries not engaged in medical duties policed the area, collecting scattered arms, ensuring no pockets of armed resistance remained, and occasionally performing the grim task of finishing off mortally wounded enemies. Once a semblance of control was achieved, the legion turned to the grim business of identifying, preparing, and disposing of bodies. Typically, Roman legionaries and officers took precedence for identification and funeral rites. In many large battles, not every Roman body could be individually recognized, especially if the clash had resulted in a staggering number of casualties. Nonetheless, the legions tried to locate high-ranking officers and retrieve the eagle standards if the standard-bearer had fallen. Respect for the legionary eagle, Aquila, was paramount. Losing it would be a catastrophic dishonor, and efforts to find it among the carnage took place as soon as the tide of the battle shifted in Rome's favor. In addition to standard-bearers, rank-and-file Roman soldiers were identified based on any personal tokens or marks on armor and belts. In some periods, soldiers wore identity tags of sorts, though such standardized identification was not always mandated. More commonly, each soldier might carry a small tile or object with personal details, though the practice varied and was never entirely consistent across all legions. Commanders recognized that ensuring families or next of kin were informed, especially in the Principate era, was important to maintaining morale and trust in the army. Allied casualties were likewise handled with more care than those of foreign enemies. Allies might hail from the provinces, or they might be local auxiliaries. Roman generals did not want to offend an allied chieftain or king by allowing his warriors to lie unburied. As with Roman legionaries, attempts were made to bury or cremate allied dead in a respectful manner, subject to local religious rites. There are accounts of Roman leaders permitting allied communities to collect their dead from the battlefield for proper burial in their homelands. Enemy corpses, on the other hand, presented a logistical challenge. If the legion was pressed for time or needed to move swiftly, they might not do more than drag the bodies into mass graves or burn them en masse to reduce the risk of disease. In other cases, particularly if the Romans intended to occupy the area, some efforts were made to bury the deceased, or at least remove them from roads, waterways, and essential farmland. The stench of rotting flesh was not only a health hazard, it risked demoralizing the local population and interfering with Rome's ability to integrate or control the territory. For that reason, burying the enemy dead in large communal pits was sometimes the cheapest and swiftest solution, albeit with minimal ceremony. Beyond the bodies, a typical battlefield was littered with equipment, ranging from swords, spears, and armor to bits of clothing, banners, or personal belongings. The Romans were famously systematic in collecting these spoils. After a decisive victory, a portion of the legion was assigned to gather intact or repairable arms to feed them back into the Roman logistical system. This salvage process helped ensure that newly raised units or auxiliary forces might be outfitted more cheaply, and it prevented valuable arms from being taken by local populations. Precious metals, especially if the enemy used elaborate armor or weaponry, were melted down or earmarked for distribution as part of the spoils of war. Taking spoils was also a matter of pride. Soldiers who had fought valiantly might secure personal trophies, such as enemy helmets, swords, or decorations. The general and his staff made certain that these spoils were inventoried, as the distribution of plunder was a key means of rewarding troops. Similarly, cavalry mounts, pack animals, and war horses belonging to the Romans or the enemy were collected if alive. These beasts might become part of the Roman war machine or be used in supply caravans. However, dead animals posed as large a sanitary threat as decaying human corpses. Their disposal was equally important, since an unburied carcass could spark disease. Roman troops typically burned or buried carcasses along with enemy bodies if they could manage to do so without undue cost in time or labor. For the legionaries themselves, the process of paying tribute to the fallen was deeply entrenched in Roman culture. If the army had time and the casualties were not overwhelming, funeral pyres might be erected. High-ranking officers could receive special honors, a funeral oration by the general, the construction of a temporary monument, or a separate pyre on which the commander and senior officers placed offerings. These ceremonies often served both to honor the dead and to inspire the living, reminding soldiers that Rome cared for its own. In many campaigns, though, practical constraints left no room for full ceremony. Instead, the legion hurried to bury or burn the fallen in mass graves, with priests or officiants performing abbreviated rites. Later, once the campaign ended, or the army wintered in a nearby province, memorial services might be held to ensure that no debt was left unpaid to the gods of the underworld, and that the spirits of the deceased were appeased. The remains of particularly revered generals or officers might be transported back to Rome or to family estates if circumstances allowed. Such an endeavor was not simple. Preserving and transporting a corpse over long distances in a pre-modern era was daunting, even with embalming methods. More commonly, the body would be cremated on a pyre, and the ashes placed in an urn for transport. This allowed families to bury or enshrine their loved ones in a more permanent location, such as the family tomb. The heroic return of an officer's ashes could become a symbolic moment for the legion, forging a sense of continuity between home and front line. Battles in the ancient world were savage affairs. The thick of close-quarters combat, waged with swords, spears, and short-range missiles, produced horrific sights. As a result, the aftermath was not only physically taxing, but mentally scarring for soldiers. Roman command recognized that a legion's morale might suffer if men had to labor too long amid the horrors of corpses and gore. Swift, orderly cleanup reflected discipline and restored a sense of normalcy, however tenuous. In some references, Roman centurions were taught to keep the rank and file busy with tasks, including burying the dead, so that the men would remain active and united in a purpose. Idleness amid a field of the dead risked reflection and despair, something that a Roman commander wished to avoid, particularly with new campaigns or battles possibly on the horizon. Furthermore, Roman discipline also entailed punishing any looting or desecration of Roman bodies for personal gain. Such an act could be seen as sacrilege and might be severely penalized. Soldiers were required to follow a structured approach to plunder, turning it in, receiving official shares, and so forth. The moral code of the legion, combined with harsh discipline, helped ensure that the practice of plundering never descended into anarchy. Meanwhile, openly defiling the bodies of high-ranking Roman officers was an unthinkable offense. Indeed, The memory of a standard-bearer or tribune being disrespected might inspire vengeance in the next confrontation. The Roman army tried to channel that spirit into disciplined aggression rather than chaotic retribution. Throughout Roman history, both burial and cremation were practiced for the dead. The preference changed over centuries, with cremation becoming more common during much of the Republic and early Empire. This tradition carried on to the battlefield, where it was often simpler and more sanitary to build large pyres than to dig many individual graves, especially in rocky terrain or in cases of extensive casualties. Nonetheless, terrain and time constraints sometimes made burning impractical. If the region offered plenty of wood, cremation might be a feasible solution, especially for the legionary dead. If not, mass graves were the fallback. For the Romans, disposing of bodies by burning was also religiously symbolic. Flames were believed to help the soul ascend or transition to the next realm. Even so, practicality often overrode thorough ritual. Mass pyres could be stacked with dozens or hundreds of bodies, each layer covered in fuel and set aflame. If an important officer was among them, the centurions might attempt to conduct a smaller, more dignified ceremony on an adjacent pyre. The smoke from these fires undoubtedly added another dimension of horror to the battlefield environment, and legionaries learned to steel themselves against such scenes early in their service. Enemy casualties, by contrast, were given minimal ritual. Whether burned or buried, it was usually done to safeguard hygiene or to appease local expectations. Only rarely did the Romans engage in symbolic destruction or humiliation of enemy bodies. For instance, if the enemy was considered especially dishonorable or had committed atrocities against Roman citizens, the general impetus was to show that the Roman presence was in control and not barbaric. On some occasions, particularly in the late Republic or early Empire, Roman generals might allow allied local rulers or communities to bury their own dead in the manner they saw fit. This was partly a diplomatic gesture, forging loyalty by respecting local traditions. From a Roman perspective, the battlefield was also a place to proclaim triumph. Generals often had artisans create trophies, wooden or stone monuments featuring captured arms, armor, and standards from the defeated foe. If time allowed, or if the victory was especially significant, some portion of the recovered equipment was set aside to be displayed either on a makeshift trophy near the battlefield or eventually in Rome during a triumph. The Romans revered such trophies, seeing them as physical evidence of the gods' favor and the unstoppable might of the legions. Soldiers might keep small tokens, like a blade or helmet, but official policy prevented them from hoarding the best spoils. The general, with the Senate's approval back in Rome, had the prerogative to dedicate the truly glorious items to a temple or a public monument. This tradition interwove with the cleanup process. As legionaries combed the field, they separated salvageable armor and weaponry from worthless scraps. Piles of swords, spears, shields, and helmets would accumulate, each potentially earmarked for the blacksmiths in the train of the army or for a triumphal display if they were especially ornate or historically notable. Captured standards, if any were found, could cause a wave of jubilation in the ranks. Some generals waited to reveal these seized relics until a formal victory ceremony, fueling morale and reinforcing the idea that the gods had blessed the Roman cause. In certain famous battles, the Romans faced notable adversaries, kings, chieftains, or rebel leaders, whose fate carried symbolic weight. If such an opponent fell in combat, their body might become an object of propaganda. For example, if a rebel leader who had threatened Roman control was killed, the Roman general might have the corpse transported or displayed in a certain manner to dissuade further rebellion. Conversely, if the general saw value in showing magnanimity, he might allow the local population to claim the body and grant it a respectable funeral. Such a gesture could help quell lingering hostility and pave the way for annexation or cooperation. These decisions underscored how the practicalities of cleaning up a battlefield went beyond mere sanitation and tradition. It was a realm where strategic messaging and political calculus were keenly applied. Similarly, if a revered Roman commander had died in an epic stand, perhaps while rallying the troops or holding a key position, the legion might build an immediate monument on the site, or vow to do so once the campaign concluded. Stones or timbers might be erected with the commander's name. Soldiers would lay wreaths or personal tokens, forging an emotional link between the memory of that leader's sacrifice and the ground they had died defending. Over time, some of these monuments became local shrines or pilgrimage spots for future Roman armies, reminding new recruits of the prowess and discipline that once triumphed there. Ancient armies, Romans included, battled a relentless invisible foe, infection and disease. The rotting carcasses of men and beasts threatened to breed pestilence, especially in the heat of Mediterranean or Near Eastern summers. After large-scale battles, flies and carrion birds would swarm the area. If the legion planned to occupy a region or build a camp nearby, efficient disposal of the dead was a necessity, not an option. For that reason, even the enemy's fallen bodies, which might otherwise be cast aside, had to be disposed of fairly quickly. This was often accomplished via mass graves or quick-burning pyres. Sometimes, local labor was conscripted, willingly or by force, to assist the legion in the gruesome labor of burying or burning the dead. The Romans understood that epidemics ravaging the newly conquered territory would undermine any strategic advantage gained. Hygiene extended to the legionaries themselves. After a battle, those not assigned to immediate burial tasks or security might be ordered to wash, repair their gear, and ensure no decaying matter clung to their armor or clothing. Roman encampments were known for their cleanliness compared to many ancient militaries. Latrines and refuse pits were systematically placed, and laws within the camp enforced orderly disposal of waste. Although no system is foolproof, these measures helped the Roman army maintain relatively better health and readiness for campaigns that might stretch on for months or even years. Cleanup after a major engagement was part of that broader logistical approach that set the Roman army apart from many of its adversaries. In certain conflicts, especially those with strong ideological or punitive motives, the Romans might use the aftermath of a battle to send a chilling message to the local population. For instance, in suppressing a rebellion, the Roman general could instruct that the bodies of rebel leaders be displayed on crucifixes along major roads. While not a daily occurrence, such brutal measures underscored Roman domination and aimed to deter further resistance. Likewise, the heads of enemy chieftains might be brought to the next city that threatened revolt, paraded among the legion's ranks as a graphic symbol of Roman vengeance. This was also a form of cleaning up, though one more ominously aligned with terror than with piety or hygiene. Yet, such extreme acts were not universal. In more diplomatically sensitive campaigns, A Roman general might order the enemy fallen to be buried or burned with a measure of respect, thus fostering goodwill. The act of returning captured or fallen aristocrats for a proper funeral could help lay the groundwork for negotiations. The same principle applies to hostages or important captives. If a Roman general allowed them to be honorably interred or returned to their families, it might smooth the path for alliances or peaceful surrenders. The complexities of empire often demanded a nuanced approach, and post-battle cleanup was, in many ways, a first test of how a region might be governed or subdued in the war's aftermath. An important aspect of Roman campaigns was the presence of camp followers, traders, merchants, family members of soldiers, and slaves. While the legionaries performed the most significant tasks in the immediate aftermath, these auxiliary participants could be directed to gather and sort through gear, scavenge wood for pyres, or handle less dangerous tasks behind the lines. Some might have specialized skills in tanning or metalworking, so they would claim usable leather from fallen animals or reforge broken weapons. Others might run stalls that sold food and drink to tired soldiers, operating just behind the main lines of the Roman camp. The synergy between official legionary discipline and the ad hoc services provided by camp followers created a mini-society that could handle the complexities of battlefield cleanup more efficiently than armies lacking such a structure. For large-scale campaigns, the Romans often employed local labor, either as forced labor from conquered populations or as paid day laborers if the region was friendly. In the immediate chaos of a major battle, this might not happen. But once the dust settled, local communities had to help remove and dispose of bodies, especially if the Roman army planned to move on swiftly. The presence of Roman engineers and surveyors, always part of a legion's baggage train, further ensured that any immediate repairs to roads and fortifications were conducted in parallel to the cleanup. The Romans recognized that a road blocked by the aftermath of a battle would hamper their next strategic move, so clearing these arteries quickly was essential. Rome's culture of commemoration played a role in battlefield aftermath. The memory of a great victory was often enshrined in literature, public speeches, and monumental arches built in Rome itself. The process sometimes began right on the site of the battle. Generals might order the erection of an altar or a small temple dedicated to one of the gods, especially if there was a perceived divine intervention that swayed the fight in Rome's favor. Over time, these sites became historical markers. Roman citizens traveling through the region decades later might see a weather-worn inscription praising a general's victory and referencing the thousands of enemy bodies that once lay there. Such commemorations kept the memory of Roman triumph alive, served as a reminder to local populations of the empire's might, and provided an intangible sense of closure for the soldiers who had fought. They could stand upon that field, seeing a temple dedicated to Jupiter or Mars, and know that their fallen brothers in arms had not been forgotten, nor the savage deeds undone. This practice fits with the Roman worldview. Each victory was not only an act of martial prowess, but also a reflection of virtue and piety, validated by the gods. While so far we have focused mostly on Roman victories, it's worth noting that the legionary approach to battlefield cleanup drastically changed if the Romans lost, or if the outcome was ambiguous. A defeated Roman army often had no capacity to clean up properly. Indeed, after catastrophic defeats like Cannae, 216 BC, during the Second Punic War, tens of thousands of Roman corpses remained on the field. It fell to the victorious Carthaginians or local Italian communities to deal with the carnage. Sometimes, Roman families, if permitted, traveled to the battleground after hostilities to retrieve the remains of sons or fathers. The Romans always considered it a mark of deep humiliation if they could not bury their own. And historians of the day often wrote with sorrow about the unburied dead of a disastrous campaign. If a Roman force partially survived and had to retreat, some minimal attempts might be made to hide or cremate the dead quickly, or to rescue the wounded, but they could not linger. In such dire circumstances, the legionary code might be overshadowed by the harsh demands of survival. The neat, methodical approach to salvage and burial gave way to panic. These events highlight that the elaborate procedures described in the best-case scenario were privileges of victory, or at least partial control of the field. In defeat, Romans understood all too well how quickly a proud legion could be forced to abandon even the simplest burial rites. Roman practices concerning battlefield cleanup were not static. Over the centuries, from the early Republic to the late Empire, reforms in the army, religious changes, including the Christianization of the empire, and shifts in cultural norms influenced how the legions handled their dead. By the time of Constantine in the early 4th century AD, Christianity started shaping official perspectives, and new forms of burial or commemoration might be introduced. Yet certain timeless aspects remained. The pragmatic need to control disease, salvage valuable gear, and secure the site remained consistent. Even as the empire's frontiers receded under barbarian pressure, some semblance of that old discipline lingered in the legions and their successors, though on a smaller scale as central authority waned. Reflecting on Roman battlefield cleanup reveals how deeply the empire's ethos of discipline, piety, and practicality ran. Even amid the horror of war, the Romans integrated social, religious, and hygienic imperatives. Their attention to detail, from retrieving the legionary eagle to building pyres and dedicating trophies, helped sustain an aura of invincibility and unity. The legion was not simply an instrument of violence, it was a living organism with rituals and systems that anchored it in the broader Roman worldview. That worldview insisted that no good Roman soldier should lie forgotten in a foreign field, that no strategic vantage be left contaminated or unutilized, and that no savage spectacle overshadow the disciplined civility Rome claimed as part of its birthright. Although modern warfare and technology bear little resemblance to the close-quarters struggles of the ancient era, the fundamental questions remain. How to care for the fallen, how to respect the living, how to process the aftermath without forfeiting one's humanity or moral code. The Romans grappled with these questions in their own uncompromising ways. Their solutions may appear harsh by modern standards: mass graves, pyres, and the occasional display of an enemy's corpse. Yet within the context of antiquity, they were recognized as comparatively thorough and methodical. These practices left their mark on Roman memory and on the very lands they conquered. Archaeological finds in former Roman battlefields, uncovered graves, burnt remnants of large funeral pyres, scattered weapons testify to the scale of devastation and the effort that followed. In the end, while countless stories celebrate the glories of Roman victories, the legion's greatness also rested in their capacity to organize and administer, even on the darkest days when the ground was soaked in blood and the air choked with smoke. The cleanup after battles was not a mere footnote. It was part of the broader Roman system that fused might with a certain sense of order. enabling an empire to endure across centuries and continents. Even now, we continue to study and unearth these silent testimonies of Roman efficiency. We piece together the remains of armor, the layout of mass graves, the precious items left behind, and we gain a fuller picture of how intimately warfare was bound to cultural identity. The Roman approach to battlefield aftermath can thus be seen as an integral part of their success as conquerors and administrators of an empire. They might have fought with unmatched ferocity, but they also recognized that a battlefield was never just a place of carnage. It was ground that had to be reclaimed and stabilized in the name of civilization, or at least in the name of Roman order. In that cyclical interplay, destruction followed by reassertion of control, Rome's empire found the power to both rule and rewrite the map of the ancient world.